I woke up on a floor that seemed to hum beneath me, a soft, insistent vibration that felt like the entire ship, or maybe the entire planet, was breathing. My head pounded, which wasn't surprising considering I had fallen asleep in what could only loosely be called a barracks, if you stretched the definition to include walls that flickered in neon green patterns and ceilings that seemed to disappear into infinity. I rolled over and promptly discovered that rolling over was a terrible idea. Gravity was playing games. Or maybe it was just me. Either way, I hit the floor with a thud and the floor gave an annoyed hum, as if I had just insulted it. From the far end of the room she appeared. She didn't stride or walk, she glided, almost as if the air itself wanted to part for her. And when I say her, I mean the alien queen, the one the briefing called formidable beyond comprehension, the one whose warriors were said to slice through enemy battalions as easily as a chef slices tomatoes. But she looked human, almost human. Long ears swept back from her head, sleek and elegant, like someone had decided that the perfect combination of alien menace and high-fashion runway model involved a few extra appendages. Her armor hummed quietly, the kind of subtle vibration that hinted it could kill me if it chose to. I wondered if it had a snooze button. "You are awake," she said, voice smooth and low, the kind of voice that could either soothe a soldier or make him soil himself in milliseconds. She tilted her head, the long ears brushing back like some exotic fan. "And you understand why you are here." I squinted. Was this a test, a trap, or worse, an intergalactic HR meeting? Coffee first." I asked because when in doubt, joke. Silence. "Okay, strike one." She raised an eyebrow. Okay, maybe not the human kind of eyebrow, more like a finely tuned alien radar for human incompetence. But I caught something. Was that a twitch? A flicker of amusement? I wasn't sure. Maybe my caffeine joke landed in some weird parallel dimension of humor, or maybe I was hallucinating. Her warriors were behind her, a row of perfectly disciplined humanoids in armor that gleamed with energy fields. They didn't blink. They didn't even seem to breathe. My nerves suggested I should apologize for existing, or maybe for my entire species. I shuffled backward and stubbed my toe on what I swear was a levitating step. The step didn't move. I assumed I was dreaming. "You will choose," she said. "One to bind in union, one to marry." The words landed like a meteor strike. My brain short-circuited. I glanced at the warriors, hoping for a hint, a suggestion, maybe a cosmic cheat sheet. Nothing. Their faces were all masks of terrifying discipline, and then I looked back at her. Queen Commander, alien with suspiciously human features and ridiculous ears. My pulse quickened. Do you mean like a dating show?" I asked because obviously that was the only rational explanation. The long ears twitched, as though the universe itself found my attempt at humor tragically amusing. She tilted her head again, and that small movement sent an entire cascade of thoughts I wasn't ready for spiraling into chaos. "You may speak, but choose wisely." Her voice softened ever so slightly, a subtle contradiction to the steel in her gaze. I realized with a sinking sense of awe and mild terror that she was serious, deadly serious. I was standing in the middle of an alien war command center and had just been told to pick a mate. And somehow, it felt less terrifying than trying to survive basic training on my home planet. I tried to imagine the situation logically. Step 1. Survive alien capture. Step 2. Learn to understand alien court customs. Step 3. Somehow make a choice that didn't result in being incinerated or frozen in suspended animation. Step 4. Maybe crack a joke along the way. I wasn't confident about Step 4. The first warrior stepped forward. Tall, imposing, probably capable of rearranging my skeleton without a second thought. I swallowed. The second warrior moved, sleek and silent, eyes like liquid onyx. I imagined what would happen if I tripped while picking, probably instant demise. I looked back at the queen. Her long ears flicked, eyes narrowing, not in anger but curiosity, maybe even challenge. I wondered if she had ever laughed before. "Well," I said, attempting casual, which came out more like a panic squeak. I don't think I should pick anyone who's, capable of ending me with one glance. I swallowed again. Maybe I should pick, the one who seems slightly less lethal. My logic was impeccable. Maybe not in any human or alien sense, but in my panicked, semi-coherent way. Her lips twitched. Not quite a smile, but close enough that I suspected the universe had momentarily aligned in my favor. You may, she said, choose differently than expected. It will be instructive. I blinked. Instructive. That sounded like a polite warning that if I chose wrong, I would die. Excellent. I weighed my options, which mostly consisted of silent, stoic death machines, and my brain started doing that thing humans do when faced with impossible odds. It panicked and got creative. And then it hit me. She wasn't just standing there giving orders. She was observing me, her eyes scanning, almost laughing behind a mask of dignity and danger. And for reasons I couldn't explain, I realized I wasn't terrified anymore. I was intrigued, so I took a breath and I said it. I choose you. The silence was monumental. Even the hum of the floor seemed to pause, holding its breath. The warriors froze. The queen blinked. Long, elegant lashes, the tiniest upward curl at the edge of her mouth. Shock, disbelief, and maybe amusement. That moment stretched across the room, across the ship, across the galaxy, and I realized that somewhere a protocol manual had just spontaneously combusted. You dare? She asked, voice low, dangerous, and yet curious. Yes, I said, trying to sound confident, which mostly sounded like a human squeak of defiance. And yes, I think I might like it. Her eyes narrowed again. That was the narrowing of a predator who had suddenly discovered its prey was not only alive but hilarious. Maybe brave, or maybe stupid, possibly all three. And I had a strange, ridiculous, intoxicating sense that this, whatever this was only just beginning. The floor hummed again, this time almost like a chuckle. I wasn't sure if it was me, the ship, or the alien queen who had found my audacity entertaining. I wasn't sure I cared. I might be dead in an hour. I might also have just changed the course of her civilization with a single, insane choice. Either way, I grinned, because when confronted with alien royalty, long ears and all, sometimes the only reasonable response was to shock them. The first few days after my audacious choice were chaotic. The palace, or whatever this interstellar fusion of fortress and spaceship was, had a way of bending reality around itself. Hallways twisted in directions that made my internal compass give up entirely, and gravity seemed to follow its own mood swings. I found myself floating unexpectedly, catching myself on walls, ceilings, and occasionally a hovering security drone that beeped at me in what I assumed was mild indignation. The queen, standing perfectly poised on the floor that hummed like it had secrets, observed all of this with an expression that was part curiosity, part exasperation, and if I squinted hard enough, maybe even amusement. You are remarkably uncoordinated for a human, she said once, watching me tumble across a corridor like an earthbound comet. Her long ears flicked as she tilted her head. Or remarkably confident in your own immunity to failure. I laughed, wobbling on a strip of anti-gravity padding that seemed to appear out of nowhere. A little of both, I said, mostly the first. Confidence tends to follow me into improbable situations. She didn't comment, just raised a single, elegant eyebrow, or the alien equivalent thereof, and the energy field in her armor hummed in a slightly amused rhythm. We had training sessions, of course. Not the kind where you learn to shoot a gun or even disarm a trap. These were interstellar court sessions, where I was expected to memorize alien etiquette, navigate complex energy corridors, and learn the difference between a formal bow, a defensive stance, and the wrong way to breathe in her presence. I made mistakes, magnificent mistakes. On the third day, I bowed too low in front of her, and the floor activated a magnetic field that spun me like a salad in a mixing bowl. She didn't laugh outright, but her long ears flicked in a way that suggested amusement or warning. I decided it was amusement. Her warriors were all around, silent and deadly, and I had to constantly remind myself not to trip over them, or on purpose, to test whether my clumsiness could induce chaos in their ranks. Spoiler, it could. They didn't like it. The queen, however, occasionally intervened, gliding across the floor like she had gravity entirely figured out, long ears sweeping gracefully, whispering instructions to prevent me from accidentally detonating the ship's power core. Her tone was calm, collected, and infinitely patient, until I told her a joke about interstellar coffee shortages. She blinked at me in disbelief, and then the tiniest upward twitch at the corner of her mouth suggested she might have considered it funny. I filed that moment away as a personal victory. Between training sessions, we had conversations. Not the kind where one person talks and the other nods politely, but real conversations. She had opinions, strong opinions. Opinions about starship design, energy field calibration, and, inexplicably, the human obsession with socks. I tried to explain socks diplomatically. She tilted her head, long ears brushing the air. Humans cover their extremities with fabric, she asked, incredulous. Yes, I said, for warmth, fashion, and occasionally to confuse aliens. That earned me a small laugh, though I had to watch carefully to make sure it wasn't actually a mechanical response from her armor's energy field. The alien council didn't take my audacity lightly. Whispers followed me through corridors, subtle manipulations of light and sound that made my skin crawl. They expected me to falter, to choose one of the warriors like a sensible human would, and for the queen to maintain decorum while she corrected my audacity. Instead, they were treated to my fumbling charm. I accidentally insulted a general by calling his armor slightly overglowy, and he nearly vaporized me with polite disapproval. The queen intervened with a simple glance, and the general froze, as if her presence alone contained the wrath of a supernova. I made a mental note: do not underestimate long-eared royalty. Meals were strange. The food was molecularly unstable. Or at least that's what I told myself when I tried to eat a hovering sphere of protein that bounced away every time I reached for it. She sat across from me, perfectly composed, watching as I attempted diplomacy with my spoon. "Humans eat with implements?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "Usually. Sometimes we just invent awkward ways to consume spherical food." She blinked, long lashes, then a tilt of her head. "Fascinating," she said. I swear the corners of her mouth twitched. She had mastered the art of looking utterly regal while also being amused by a human's pathetic attempts at self-preservation. And then came the energy field exercise. She had me navigate a corridor filled with shifting magnetic fields, floating platforms, and holographic adversaries designed to test agility, intelligence, and nerve. I flailed spectacularly. The queen followed, gliding alongside me, occasionally flicking a hand to adjust a platform's trajectory or slow a holographic opponent. At one point, I tripped on nothing at all, and her long ears brushed my shoulder as she caught me mid-fall. "Do not rely solely on instinct," she said, voice calm, lips twitching. "Or rely entirely on instinct if your goal is to amuse me." I took that as a compliment. By the end of the week, the absurdity of my existence in her world had become a rhythm. I was learning, adapting, and somehow surviving. The queen, despite her imposing presence, had started to let small cracks of humor show through her composed facade. She would make sarcastic comments about my clumsy attempts at ceremonial dancing, or flick her hand to send a floating teacup spinning in my direction just to see if I could catch it without imploding. I started thinking less about death and more about strategy, survival strategy, humor strategy, and possibly, awkwardly, strategy for connection. One evening, while the twin moons cast silver patterns on the observation deck, she spoke softly, almost conversationally. "You surprise me," she said, long ears brushing the air as she leaned against a railing. "Most humans would have been vaporized by now." I smiled, trying not to trip over my own words. "I aim to keep life interesting." Also, survival is more fun when you get to annoy a queen. She didn't laugh, not out loud, but the faintest upward curve at the corners of her mouth told me I had succeeded in something. Connection, maybe, or defiance. I wasn't sure which. Her warriors watched silently, the air thick with tension and curiosity. They expected protocol. They expected obedience. Instead, they got a human soldier who tripped through their halls, joked about interstellar hazards, and somehow made the queen, the terrifying, long-eared, almost impossibly composed queen, glimmer with amusement. Somewhere in that strange mix of danger, humor, and absurdity, I realized I had shifted from being a prize to being a partner in chaos. And maybe, just maybe, that was the most dangerous and exhilarating position to occupy in the galaxy. By the time the first week ended, the Queen and I were no longer merely prisoner and captor. We were collaborators, playful adversaries, human and alien, humor and danger intertwined. And as I lay down that night on a platform that hovered precariously above the endless void of the command deck, I smiled at the realization that I had survived my first week. More importantly, I had done so with my dignity, mostly, intact, and I had discovered that long ears could convey more subtle emotion than I had ever thought possible. The galaxy, it seemed, had decided to let me continue, and the Queen, mysterious, sharp, and endlessly intriguing, had made it clear that this was only the beginning. The observation deck was quieter than usual, a rarity given the constant hum of the palace ship systems, and the occasional patrols of long-eared warriors gliding silently through the halls. Twin suns hung low on the horizon, bathing the metal corridors in molten gold and copper, and I leaned against the railing, trying not to think about how dangerously exposed I was in this elevated position. The Queen appeared beside me, long ears sweeping the air, her presence making the gravity of the room, or at least the gravitational field of my nervousness, seem negligible. "You seem contemplative," she said, voice calm but edged with that subtle sharpness that always made me double-check if I was still alive. "Just thinking," I admitted, "about how I survived a week without getting vaporized, eaten, or accidentally committing an interstellar etiquette crime, and about how I've apparently chosen the most terrifyingly competent alien in the galaxy too, you know, Mary." I grinned, though I wasn't sure if it came across as bravery or foolishness. Her eyes glinted, long ears flicking ever so slightly, and she let out a soft sound that I realized was almost laughter. "You are remarkably audacious," she said, "and oddly adaptable. I expected chaos, confusion, and fear. Instead, I have found amusement, resilience, and, dare I say, ingenuity." She paused as if weighing every word, every potential interpretation before continuing. "Most humans are predictable. You are not. That is intriguing." I tried not to take it as a compliment, but failing felt impossible. The next few hours were a mix of chaos and revelation. There was a minor hull breach in one of the lower decks, which normally would have required a full emergency response team. I somehow got pulled into it because my reflexes, accidental as they were, triggered a sequence of overrides that stabilized the breach faster than anyone anticipated. The Queen arrived mid-crisis, flowing across the corridors, long ears brushing past blinking panels, and caught me in the act. She didn't scold. She didn't glare. Instead, she tilted her head and her lips quirked in the smallest, most dangerous hint of a smile. "Your unpredictability is useful," she said. "I may keep you alive after all." I felt a thrill, half pride, half terror. Dinner that night was a study in absurdity. Floating platters of molecularly precise food hovered over the table, shifting colors with every blink, and I tried to catch a sphere of protein the size of a baseball without sending it ricocheting into the control panels. I failed, twice. She leaned forward, long ears nearly grazing the floating sphere as she flicked it perfectly into my grasp with a single finger. "Do not let pride dictate coordination," she said. "Or do. It amuses me." I chuckled and nearly dropped it again. Somehow, the Queen managed to look both imperious and playful, terrifying and enchanting, all at once, and I realized that the absurdity of our situation had become a rhythm I no longer wanted to escape. The council tried to interfere one last time, whispered objections about protocol, about tradition, about the audacity of a human soldier choosing the queen herself. I met them with a grin, practiced sarcasm, and a well-timed demonstration of how accidentally setting off multiple defense protocols could also stabilize the main reactor. They were silent, bewildered, defeated by chaos. And the queen, she stood beside me, long ears brushing against the energy hum of her armor, and gave me the slightest nod. A silent acknowledgement that, yes, the human soldier had survived, adapted, and in his own fumbling, unpredictable way, earned a place at her side. Weeks passed in a blur of training, political maneuvering, and something that felt suspiciously like companionship. She challenged me, and I challenged her back, sometimes successfully, often not. But each clash brought us closer, a weaving of humor and tension, of strategy and understanding. I learned her moods by subtle flicks of her ears, her pauses in speech, the almost imperceptible shifts in her energy field. She, in turn, seemed to discover that humans were not merely fragile, chaotic creatures, but capable of ingenuity, courage, and, occasionally, delightful absurdity. I made mistakes, spectacular, nearly fatal mistakes, and yet I survived, I adapted, I laughed. And slowly she laughed too, though she would never admit it aloud. One night, while observing the stars from a deck suspended above the endless void, she leaned close, the hum of her armor vibrating softly, and whispered, "You have changed the pattern of this place. My warriors, my council, even myself, we were unprepared for you." I smiled, long ears brushing against the faint gust of recycled air. "I didn't mean to," I said. "I just didn't want to pick anyone else. You surprised me more than anyone could imagine, and I figured, why not?" Her lips twitched in that subtle, almost imperceptible way, the kind of motion that made even the vastness of space feel intimate. "I should be outraged," she said, "and yet I am curious, perhaps even pleased." Her long ears twitched again. I realized that in her way she was acknowledging the bond that had grown between us. One built on chaos, humor, danger, and mutual challenge. The council relented. The palace ship settled into a rhythm that now included me, a human, as something more than a war prize. I learned to navigate their strange rituals with a combination of clumsy skill and irrepressible humor. I discovered the thrill of outwitting a council of deadly strategists, not with raw power, but with timing, creativity, and the occasional sarcastic comment. I learned to interpret the subtle language of long ears, the shifts in tone, and the cadence of her commands, finding that communication transcended mere words. And finally, when the time came to formalize the union, I stood beside her, long ears brushing the air, armor humming, warriors silent and alert, and felt an unexpected calm. I had arrived here as a human soldier, a survivor, a pawn in an alien hierarchy. I was leaving, or rather, evolving into someone who had dared, laughed, stumbled, and ultimately thrived alongside a being who defied expectation. She extended her hand, and I took it without hesitation, fingers brushing against energy field and skin, human and alien united by choice, chaos, and unexpected affection.